What you're about to witness is the most brutal public destruction of a wife and mother ever recorded in a corporate boardroom. A billionaire CEO, surrounded by his entire board of directors, accused his pregnant wife of adultery using fabricated evidence, while their terrified 4-year-old son watched from the corner. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. The woman they thought they destroyed would return 15 years later to own everything they took from her. And the revenge? It was so perfectly calculated that her ex-husband never saw it coming until it was too late. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone who knew exactly how to hurt you where it would damage you most? Well, they thought they buried her forever, erased her from existence, made sure she could never recover. But what if the victim was actually the mastermind? What if every move, every business decision, every strategic partnership over the next 15 years was part of an elaborate plan to reclaim not just what was stolen, but everything her ex-husband had ever built? If you find value in stories that challenge your perspective on wealth and power, consider subscribing. Today we're examining a compelling case that raises important questions about accountability in the billionaire class. This is the story of Vivian Ashford, a 28-year-old software engineering genius whose brilliant mind had revolutionized artificial intelligence algorithms at Stanford University. She was the kind of woman who could solve problems that stumped entire teams of engineers, the kind of visionary who saw solutions where others saw impossibilities. 5 years earlier, she had married Benjamin Ashford, the 35-year-old CEO of Ashford Dynamics, one of America's largest technology conglomerates. Their wedding had been called the event of the season, a union between beauty and the beast of business. Benjamin had swept her off her feet, recognizing her potential and promising to build an empire together. Now, as Vivian walked through the marble floors of Ashford Tower, her heels clicking against the pristine surface, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The crystal chandeliers, the executive suites, the penthouse apartment, all of it felt like a golden cage that grew smaller every day. "Mommy, why does Daddy always look angry now?" asked Sebastian, their 4-year-old son, as she picked him up from the company's elite daycare center. Those innocent blue eyes, so much like his father's, searched her face for answers she couldn't provide. "Daddy's just busy with work, sweetheart," she whispered, though the lie tasted bitter. The truth was far more complicated and far more painful. For the past 2 years, Benjamin had been transforming into someone she didn't recognize. The man who once celebrated her innovations now dismissed her ideas. The husband who used to seek her counsel now excluded her from every important decision. The father who once played with Sebastian now barely acknowledged their son's existence. What Vivian didn't know was that Celeste Moreau had been slowly infiltrating their social circle. This stunning French art curator, with her platinum blonde hair and calculating amber eyes, had set her sights on Benjamin's fortune and was methodically dismantling his marriage from within. Celeste was a master manipulator who understood exactly how to play on a successful man's insecurities. She whispered doubts about Vivian's loyalty, questioned her commitment to the family, and gradually convinced Benjamin that his wife was plotting against him. Every charity gala they attended, Celeste was there, the sympathetic friend who listened to Benjamin's complaints about his distant wife. Every business dinner, she positioned herself as the understanding confidant who truly appreciated his genius. Every family vacation, she somehow appeared at the same resort, the same restaurant, the same exclusive events. But the most devastating secret of all was the one Vivian carried alone. That evening, as autumn rain battered the windows of their penthouse, she sat in the nursery she had lovingly decorated, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. After 2 years of trying, after countless nights of disappointment and Benjamin's growing accusations that she was defective, she was finally carrying their second child. She should have felt joy, but all she felt was dread. The timing couldn't have been worse. Her marriage was crumbling, her husband was becoming increasingly hostile, and now she was bringing another child into a home where love had been replaced by suspicion, and warmth had been replaced by calculated cruelty. Having everything money could buy meant nothing when you felt like a prisoner in your own life. Vivian had the penthouse, the designer clothes, the perfect family image that graced magazine covers, but her husband was becoming a stranger who looked at her with growing contempt. What she didn't understand was that a predator had already marked her family for destruction, and every day she stayed in that golden prison brought her closer to losing everything she held dear. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most easily manipulated by outsiders with hidden agendas. Benjamin's love for his wife was being weaponized against her, and Vivian had no idea that her perfect life was about to become her worst nightmare. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Vivian entered the boardroom of Ashford Dynamics. She had been summoned by Benjamin's assistant under the pretense of discussing a new charity initiative, something that should have been a routine meeting. Instead, she walked into a room filled with the company's most senior executives, board members, and, most disturbingly, their 4-year-old son Sebastian, who sat quietly in the corner with his nanny, looking confused and frightened by the tension crackling through the air. Benjamin stood at the head of the table, his steel blue eyes cold and unforgiving. His expensive Armani suit was perfectly pressed, his tie precisely knotted, but there was something different about him, something cruel and calculating that made Vivian's blood turn to ice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Benjamin announced, his voice carrying the authority that had built a billion-dollar empire, "I've called this meeting to address personal matters that will significantly impact our company's future and reputation." Vivian felt her heart begin to race. This wasn't about charity work, this was something else entirely, something that felt like a trap closing around her. "As you all know," Benjamin continued, straightening his tie with deliberate precision, "strong leadership requires decisive action, even when it involves our personal lives. I've discovered that my wife has been less than faithful to our marriage vows." The words hit the room like a bomb. Gasps echoed around the conference table. Vivian's face drained of all color as she realized what was happening. "Benjamin, what are you—" she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Silence!" he roared, his voice reverberating off the glass walls with such force that Sebastian whimpered and reached toward his mother. But Benjamin's glare stopped the child mid-motion. "I will not have an adulteress interrupting me while I conduct official business." Charles Blackwood, Benjamin's father-in-law and former mentor, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Even he seemed shocked by this public humiliation. "Benjamin, perhaps this should be handled privately." "No, Charles." Benjamin's lips curled into a cold smile as he pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. "The board deserves to know the true character of the woman who has been representing our company at charity galas and social functions." He opened the folder with theatrical precision, spreading photographs across the polished table like playing cards in a deadly game. "I have here photographic evidence of Vivian's affair with Dr. Adrian Cross, the pediatric surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital." Vivian's mind reeled as she stared at the images. They showed her meeting with Dr. Cross in various locations, his office, a coffee shop, a restaurant. But these weren't romantic encounters. These were medical consultations about Sebastian's treatment for a minor condition. Yet somehow the photographs had been cropped and angled to suggest intimacy where none existed. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief and growing terror. "Am I?" Benjamin stood, his 6'3" frame imposing as he circled her chair like a predator stalking wounded prey. "Then explain these intimate photographs. Explain why you've been meeting him in secret for months. Explain why our marriage has been sexless while you've been warming another man's bed." The room fell into deadly silence. Sebastian began to cry, confused by the hostility and hatred filling the air around him. The little boy didn't understand the adult machinations destroying his family, but he could sense the danger. Vivian reached for her son, desperate to comfort him, but Benjamin grabbed her wrist with bruising force. "Don't touch him." Each word was delivered with venom. "You've forfeited that right." "Benjamin, please." Vivian's voice broke completely. "Sebastian is scared. Whatever issues we have, don't do this in front of our son. Don't humiliate our family like this." But Benjamin was beyond reason, intoxicated by the power of public destruction. What Vivian didn't know was that every piece of evidence had been meticulously fabricated by Celeste Moreau. The French art curator had spent months doctoring photographs, hiring actors, and creating an elaborate web of lies designed to convince Benjamin of his wife's infidelity. "I want a divorce," he declared, slamming a thick stack of legal documents onto the table. "Immediately. You will sign these papers, relinquishing all rights to Ashford property, custody of Sebastian, and any claim to alimony or spousal support." Vivian's hands shook as she looked at the divorce papers. The terms were absolutely devastating. She would leave with nothing, not even the right to see her son. "I won't sign this," she said, her voice gaining strength despite her terror. "I've done nothing wrong, and I won't abandon Sebastian." Benjamin's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Then perhaps you'd prefer a public trial. I'm sure the media would love to dissect your sordid affairs in detail. Think about what that would do to Sebastian's reputation when he's older. Think about how it would destroy the Ashford name forever." The threat hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. Vivian looked around the room at faces she had considered friends, board members she had entertained at dinner parties, executives whose families she had helped through difficult times. Not one of them met her eyes. They had already judged her guilty based on Benjamin's word alone. This case raises an uncomfortable question about professional reputation in the digital age. I'm curious, do you think public vindication ever truly repairs the damage? Share your perspective below. Margaret Thornfield, the company's chief financial officer and Benjamin's longtime ally, leaned forward with false sympathy. "Sign the papers, Vivian. Cut your losses and try to maintain some dignity." Sebastian's sobs filled the silence that followed. The little boy was watching his world disintegrate, seeing his father's hatred and his mother's desperation without understanding why. With her son crying in the corner and threats of complete social destruction hanging over her head, Vivian made the choice that would haunt her for 15 years. Her hands trembling violently, she reached for the pen and signed away everything: her home, her reputation, her rights, and most devastatingly, custody of Sebastian. But what Benjamin didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Vivian was carrying his second child, a daughter who would grow up never knowing her father, but who would eventually help bring him down. The ink was still wet on the divorce papers when security escorted Vivian from the building that had once been her second home. She was allowed exactly 30 minutes to pack her personal belongings from the penthouse, 30 minutes to collect the remnants of 5 years of marriage and motherhood. Sebastian had been whisked away by his nanny before the final signing, sparing him the sight of his mother's exile, but not before he had run to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs and begging her not to leave him. "Mommy, don't go. I'll be good, I promise," he had sobbed, his tears soaking through her dress. Those desperate pleas would echo in Vivian's mind for years to come. Standing on the sidewalk outside Ashford Tower with nothing but a single suitcase and her purse, Vivian felt the full weight of her destruction. The morning papers would soon carry headlines about the dramatic divorce, painting her as an adulteress and gold digger who had been exposed and cast out by her righteous husband. She had nowhere to go. Her parents had died in a car accident during her second year of marriage, leaving her without family support. Her former friends from Stanford had either lost touch or were now too intimidated by the Ashford name to risk association with her. The few friends she had made during her marriage were all connected to Benjamin's social circle and had already turned their backs. But as she stood in the cold rain, one hand unconsciously protective over her still flat stomach, Vivian made a vow that would drive her for the next 15 years. She would survive this devastation. She would rebuild from nothing. And someday, somehow, Benjamin Ashford would pay for what he had done to her and to their son. The women's shelter in East Portland was a far cry from the luxury she had known, but it offered something more valuable than marble floors and crystal chandeliers: sanctuary. For the first month after her exile, she barely spoke, moving through the motions of survival, like a ghost haunting her own existence. The pregnancy made everything harder. Morning sickness struck with brutal efficiency, and she often had to excuse herself from job interviews to be sick in public restrooms. When potential employers searched her name online, they found carefully planted stories about her affair and disgraceful behavior, ensuring that even entry-level positions remained out of reach. Dr. Rachel Martinez, the shelter's counselor, was the first person in months to show Vivian genuine kindness without judgment. A former corporate lawyer who had reinvented herself after her own traumatic divorce, Dr. Martinez recognized the signs of systematic psychological abuse. "What you experienced was a calculated campaign of destruction," she told Vivian during one of their sessions. Your husband didn't just divorce you, he assassinated your character and reputation to ensure you could never recover. Vivian nodded, finally understanding the nightmare she had lived through. He made sure everyone would see me as the villain in our story. But you're not a victim anymore, Dr. Martinez said firmly. You're a survivor. And survivors have two choices. They can let their trauma define them, or use it as fuel to build something better. Those words became Vivian's mantra as she slowly began rebuilding her life. She took a job at a small tech startup under an assumed name, using her maiden name combined with her middle name to avoid recognition. The work was far below her qualifications, but it paid enough to rent a tiny studio apartment and begin planning for her daughter's birth. When Isabella was born on that snowy February morning, with only Dr. Martinez by her side, Vivian held her daughter and made another vow. Isabella would never know the powerlessness her mother had felt. This little girl would grow up strong, independent, and protected. Over the following months, working under her new identity, Vivian slowly clawed her way up from junior developer to senior architect. She specialized in AI and machine learning algorithms, the same field where she had once been considered a visionary before Benjamin had stolen her ideas and claimed them as his own innovations. She was brilliant, driven, and utterly ruthless when it came to business. What clients didn't know was that her success was fueled by a white-hot determination that never cooled, a desire for justice that grew stronger with each passing day. Isabella grew up believing her father had died before her birth, a protective lie Vivian maintained to shield her daughter from the toxic truth. The little girl was bright, curious, and possessed an empathy that reminded Vivian of Sebastian at that age. Sometimes you have to let your old self die completely to become who you're meant to be. The broken woman who had signed those divorce papers was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who had wronged her. While Benjamin thought his ex-wife had disappeared into obscurity, Vivian was building an empire under her new identity. But this wasn't just about achieving success. Every business decision, every product launch, every strategic partnership was carefully designed to eventually challenge Ashford Dynamics. Her consulting firm started small, taking on projects that bigger companies wouldn't touch. She specialized in AI and machine learning algorithms, the same field where she had once been considered a revolutionary before Benjamin had stolen her ideas and claimed them as his own innovations for Ashford Dynamics. But Vivian had learned something valuable during her time in the shadows. Patience was the most powerful weapon in business warfare. For the first 5 years, she deliberately avoided any direct competition with Ashford Dynamics, allowing Benjamin to assume his former wife had simply vanished into irrelevance. Instead, she focused on building relationships, gathering intelligence, and developing technology that would eventually challenge Benjamin's dominance. By Isabella's 5th birthday, her consulting firm had grown into a mid-level technology company. She had carefully assembled a team of brilliant engineers and strategists, many of whom had their own grievances against powerful corporations that had exploited or betrayed them. What her competitors didn't realize was that every hire was strategic, every partnership calculated, every innovation purposefully designed to target specific weaknesses in Ashford's business model. The systematic attack began in year 6. Whenever Ashford launched a new product, her company would release a competing solution that was superior, more affordable, and more innovative. The competition was driving down Ashford's market share and stock prices, though Benjamin remained oblivious to who was behind his company's struggles. Her team had infiltrated industry conferences where Ashford executives spoke, planted questions that exposed flaws in their products, and quietly spread information about better alternatives. They poached key employees with offers that Ashford couldn't match, gradually weakening their competitors' technical capabilities. Most brilliantly, she had been acquiring smaller companies that supplied crucial components to Ashford Dynamics, slowly gaining control over their supply chain without them realizing it. When contracts came up for renewal, prices would mysteriously increase or delivery schedules would become unreliable. Isabella grew up believing her father had died before her birth, but she inherited both parents' genius, her mother's strategic mind and her father's business instincts, without his cruelty. By age 10, the little girl was already showing remarkable aptitude for mathematics, computer programming, and strategic thinking. "Mommy, why don't we ever talk about Daddy?" Isabella asked one evening while working on her advanced coding projects. "Because some people leave us so they can become guardian angels," Vivian replied, maintaining the protective fiction that shielded her daughter from the toxic truth. What Isabella didn't know was that she had a half-brother across the country who was asking similar questions and getting very different answers. Meanwhile, Sebastian was growing up in his father's cold mansion, asking questions about his mother that Benjamin deflected with increasingly desperate lies. The boy had been told that his mother was a criminal who had abandoned the family, but these stories never quite made sense to his intelligent, questioning mind. The sensitive, artistic boy that Benjamin saw as weak was actually developing investigative skills that would eventually expose the truth. Sebastian excelled in history and journalism classes, drawn to uncovering facts and exposing injustice. His teachers praised his ability to research complex topics and present compelling arguments based on evidence. At 15, Sebastian had begun quietly researching his mother's disappearance, using the resources available at his elite private school to access databases and archives that most teenagers couldn't reach. He was particularly troubled by the inconsistencies in the official story of his parents' divorce. Benjamin's new wife, Celeste, seemed to notice Sebastian's growing curiosity and made increasingly harsh comments about his obsession with the past. She pushed Benjamin to send the boy to boarding school, claiming that he needed stronger male influences to overcome his weak tendencies. But Sebastian was more resilient than either of them realized. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every attempt to erase his mother's memory only strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth. As the years progressed, Vivian's company had become one of the most innovative and disruptive forces in the technology sector. Industry analysts began writing articles about the mysterious CEO, who seemed to anticipate market trends with supernatural accuracy, and whose company consistently outmaneuvered much larger competitors. The level of strategic planning here is absolutely mind-blowing. If you're amazed by this 15-year chess game, hit that subscribe button because we're about to reveal how it all comes together. By Isabella's 15th birthday, Vivian's empire had grown large enough to pose a serious threat to Ashford Dynamics' market position. Stock analysts were beginning to ask difficult questions about why Ashford was losing ground to smaller, more agile competitors. Benjamin was becoming increasingly paranoid and erratic, making business decisions that seemed driven more by emotion than logic. His board of directors was growing concerned about his leadership, and rumors were circulating about potential leadership changes. What none of them knew was that the woman they had destroyed 15 years earlier was now in a position to acquire their entire company, and she was finally ready to reveal herself to the world. At 18, Sebastian Ashford was studying investigative journalism at Harvard when he stumbled upon inconsistencies in his parents' divorce records that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his family. It started as a class assignment about corporate fraud, but Sebastian found himself drawn to cases involving powerful men who had destroyed their wives through legal manipulation. Something about these stories felt personal, familiar, like echoes of conversations he had overheard growing up. Using the research resources available through Harvard's extensive databases, Sebastian began examining publicly available court records from high-profile divorces. When he searched for his own parents' case, expecting to find routine paperwork, he discovered something deeply disturbing. The photographic evidence that had been used to prove his mother's alleged adultery looked professionally staged. The lighting was too perfect, the angles too convenient, the body language too rehearsed. Having studied media manipulation in his journalism courses, Sebastian recognized the hallmarks of fabricated evidence. More troubling still, the private investigators Benjamin had supposedly hired to gather evidence against Vivian had all been employed by the same shadowy firm, a company that had since been exposed for manufacturing false evidence in divorce cases. The firm's owner had fled the country after being indicted for fraud, but not before Sebastian found records showing that someone else had paid the investigation fees, not Benjamin. The payment records led to a series of shell companies, which eventually traced back to Celeste Moreau. She had paid for the fabricated evidence against his mother, not his father. Driven by growing suspicion, Sebastian hacked into medical databases using skills he had learned from a computer science roommate. What he found about his stepmother's psychiatric history made his blood run cold. Celeste had undergone extensive treatment for delusional disorders and manipulative personality traits. Her medical records contained references to previous relationships with wealthy men that had ended in suspicious circumstances, including 2 cases where her partners had died of apparent heart attacks shortly after updating their wills in her favor. But the most shocking discovery came when Sebastian started researching successful technology companies that had been challenging Ashford Dynamics over the past decade. One name kept appearing in industry publications: the mysterious CEO whose company had been consistently outmaneuvering his father's business. The CEO's background was remarkably similar to his mother's: Stanford University, artificial intelligence expertise, the same age, even the same birthday. When Sebastian cross-referenced educational records and professional accomplishments, the pattern became undeniable. The woman running the company that had been systematically destroying his father's empire shared every significant biographical detail with his supposedly dead mother. Even more compelling, the CEO's daughter was exactly the right age to be his half-sister, the baby his mother had been carrying when she disappeared. When Sebastian realized that this mysterious CEO who had been outmaneuvering his father for years shared his mother's birthday, education, and expertise, the truth hit him like lightning. His mother wasn't dead. She wasn't hiding in shame. She was winning. For weeks after this discovery, Sebastian wrestled with conflicting emotions: anger at the deception that had shaped his entire childhood, grief for the mother-son relationship he had been denied, fear about confronting the elaborate lies that had defined his family. But gradually, anger gave way to admiration. His mother hadn't just survived Benjamin's attempt to destroy her. She had spent 15 years building something powerful enough to challenge him on his own terms. She had taken every advantage they had stripped from her and rebuilt it into something stronger. The decision to make contact wasn't made lightly. Sebastian spent days crafting and deleting emails, trying to find words adequate for a moment 15 years in the making. How do you reach out to a mother who had been erased from your life? How do you apologize for believing the lies told about her? In the end, he chose simplicity over eloquence. Sebastian sent one email that would change everything. "I know who you are, Mom. We need to talk." He included enough details to prove he had uncovered the truth about the fabricated evidence, Celeste's criminal history, and her new identity. Most importantly, he included a photo of himself, no longer the terrified 4-year-old who had watched her exile, but an 18-year-old young man who had inherited her intelligence and her sense of justice. When he pressed send, Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced since early childhood: hope that his family might somehow be restored. Across the country, Vivian was reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant flagged an urgent email. For the first time in 15 years, her carefully constructed emotional walls began to crumble. Her son, her brilliant, beautiful son who had been stolen from her, had found her. The 15-year separation was finally coming to an end. They agreed to meet at a small cafe in neutral territory, far from Portland and far from New York, where Benjamin might have surveillance. Vivian arrived early, her hands shaking as she waited for the young man she had last seen as a terrified 4-year-old. When Sebastian walked through the door, she felt her breath catch in her throat. After 15 years, she was seeing her son again, no longer the frightened child, but an 18-year-old young man with his father's strong jawline and blue eyes, but something gentler in his expression. Something that reminded her of the boy who used to ask endless questions about everything. He was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet intensity that suggested deep thinking rather than aggressive ambition. When he spotted her across the cafe, he stopped dead in his tracks, his composure cracking as 15 years of separation hit him all at once. "You look exactly like I remembered," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he approached her table. Vivian rose from her chair, unsure whether to hug him or maintain distance. The moment stretched between them, 15 years of forced separation creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge with simple words. "I'm sorry," Sebastian continued, moving closer. "I'm sorry it took me this long to find you. I'm sorry I believed the lies about you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to stay with you when I was little." The apology broke something inside Vivian that had been holding together for 15 years. She reached for her son, and he stepped into her embrace. A reunion that should have happened thousands of times over the years, but was happening for the first time since he was 4 years old. They spent hours talking, filling in the gaps of 15 years with stories, explanations, and shared grief for the time they had lost. Sebastian learned about Isabella, his half-sister who shared his mother's brilliant mind and artistic sensitivity. Vivian learned about her son's struggles with depression, his conflicts with Benjamin over his career choices, and his growing awareness that Celeste saw him as an obstacle to her ultimate control of the Ashford fortune. When Vivian finally told Isabella the truth about her parentage, the 15-year-old girl's reaction was a mixture of shock, anger, and fierce protectiveness toward the family she had just discovered. "So I have a father who tried to destroy you, and a half-brother who's been manipulated his whole life?" Isabella asked, her analytical mind already processing the implications. "You have a family that's been broken but is finally coming back together," Vivian replied carefully. But their reunion was overshadowed by devastating news that Sebastian had uncovered. Through his investigation into Celeste's background, he had discovered something terrifying. She wasn't just an opportunistic gold digger looking for wealthy husbands. "She's done this before," Sebastian explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I found records of at least 4 previous marriages to wealthy men. In every case, the man's first wife was discredited and divorced under suspicious circumstances. Within 2 years of each marriage, the husband died of apparent heart attacks or strokes." Vivian felt ice water flood her veins as she realized how close she might have come to becoming another casualty in Celeste's deadly game. "The medical examiners never found evidence of foul play," Sebastian continued, "but the timing was suspiciously convenient. Each time, Celeste inherited everything and disappeared to a new city with a new identity." "Your father is in danger," Vivian said quietly. The words strange to speak after 15 years of hatred. "I think you might be too," Sebastian replied. "She's been asking questions about you, trying to find out if you're really gone or if you might resurface someday. If she discovers you're alive and successful, you could become a threat she needs to eliminate." For the first time since their reunion began, the 3 family members sat in silence, processing the magnitude of the danger they were facing. Celeste wasn't just the woman who had destroyed their family. She was a predator who had killed before and would kill again to protect her secrets. Sometimes the people who destroy your family become the very reason you fight to save what's left of it. Vivian realized that her 15-year plan for justice had just become a race against time to save the man who had wronged her and protect the children who meant everything to her. Vivian's final gambit was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. She would use Celeste's own methods against her, creating a scenario where the truth would be exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. First, her company announced a hostile takeover bid for Ashford Dynamics, offering to purchase the company at a price that was simultaneously generous enough to attract shareholders and low enough to suggest that Ashford was in serious financial trouble. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business community and triggered a media frenzy that put enormous pressure on Benjamin's already fragile mental state. Benjamin, his judgment clouded by months of psychiatric medications that Celeste had been secretly adding to his food and drinks, responded exactly as Vivian had predicted, with rage, paranoia, and threats of legal action that only made him appear more unstable to investors and the public. But the most crucial element of the plan required Sebastian to take an enormous personal risk. He would confront Celeste directly while wearing a recording device, hoping to capture her confession before she could eliminate the evidence of her crimes. The confrontation took place in Benjamin's home office on a Tuesday evening when he was attending an emergency board meeting about the takeover bid. Sebastian presented Celeste with copies of her medical records, photographs of her with previous victims, and documentation of the illegal drug regimen she had been administering to his father. "I know who you are," Sebastian said, his voice steady despite his inner terror. "I know what you did to my mother, what you're doing to my father, and what you're planning to do to me." For a moment, Celeste maintained her mask of shocked innocence, but when she realized the extent of Sebastian's evidence, her facade cracked completely. Gone was the devoted wife and caring stepmother, replaced by a cold-eyed predator who saw no point in maintaining her performance once it had been compromised. "You little F," she hissed, her French accent becoming more pronounced as her control slipped. "Do you have any idea how easy it would be to arrange an accident for you? A drug overdose, perhaps, or a car crash caused by teenage recklessness?" But Celeste's greatest mistake was her arrogance. Once she started talking, she couldn't stop herself from boasting about her achievements. She described in detail how she had manipulated Benjamin against Vivian, how she had fabricated the evidence of adultery, and how she had been slowly poisoning Benjamin's food for months. "Your father is so far gone he barely remembers what day it is," she laughed. "He wouldn't even properly grieve your death when it happens. I've made sure of that." The recording device captured every word in crystal-clear audio as Celeste revealed the extent of her crimes. She boasted about the previous men she had murdered, described her methods for avoiding detection, and outlined her detailed plans to eliminate Sebastian once the inheritance was secured. "The heart medication I've been giving your father will cause a massive cardiac episode within the next few weeks," she explained with clinical detachment. "The doctors will blame his stress from the business troubles and his deteriorating mental health. No one will suspect murder." What Celeste didn't realize was that every confession, every threat, every detail of her murderous plans was being transmitted live to Vivian's legal team, who were already coordinating with federal authorities to prepare arrest warrants. When Sebastian asked why she had targeted their family specifically, Celeste's answer revealed the depth of her psychopathy. "Your mother was too smart, too beautiful, too perfect. Women like her make it harder for women like me to succeed. She needed to be destroyed as an example to others who might think they're untouchable." The recording lasted 47 minutes and contained enough evidence to convict Celeste of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and dozens of other charges spanning multiple jurisdictions. When the audio was released to major news outlets the following morning, it triggered the most spectacular corporate scandal of the decade. Within hours, Celeste Moreau had been arrested at her yoga class, dragged away in handcuffs while cameras captured her shocked expression. The evidence Sebastian had gathered, combined with Vivian's 15 years of intelligence gathering and Dr. Cross's historical research, painted a picture of a serial killer who had been using marriage as a weapon for over 2 decades. Benjamin, freed from the fog of psychiatric drugs, but faced with the devastating truth about his marriage and his treatment of Vivian, suffered a complete psychological breakdown. He was hospitalized under psychiatric supervision, unable to function as CEO or make coherent decisions about his company's future. The media explosion was unprecedented. Cable news networks ran the story continuously for days. Social media erupted with hashtags demanding justice for Vivian and other victims. True crime podcasters dissected every detail of Celeste's methods and previous victims. Most importantly for Vivian's long-term plans, the chaos at Ashford Dynamics created the power vacuum she had been working toward for 15 years. With Benjamin incapacitated and the company's reputation in ruins, the board would have no choice but to accept her takeover bid, or watch the entire enterprise collapse. The real story isn't the revenge. It's what both parties sacrificed to get there. Subscribe if you appreciate thoroughly researched narratives that go beyond the headlines. The emergency board meeting at Ashford Dynamics was called for a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Celeste's arrest had sent shockwaves through the corporate world. The mahogany conference room was filled with the same executives who had witnessed Vivian's humiliation 15 years earlier, though many faces had changed over time. When the Ashford Dynamics board voted unanimously to accept the buyout offer, they had no idea they were about to witness the most shocking identity reveal in corporate history. The mysterious CEO who had been outmaneuvering their company for years had finally agreed to a public appearance to discuss the merger. The press conference was scheduled for the same hotel where Vivian and Benjamin had been married 20 years earlier, a detail that would only be understood, in retrospect, but which sent a clear message to those who knew how to read it. When the woman they knew only as the reclusive CEO walked to the podium, she commanded attention with quiet authority. For 15 years, she had maintained her disguise through conservative styling, dark glasses, and careful media management that kept her face out of business publications. But today, she removed the dark glasses that had hidden her identity and looked directly into the cameras. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Reporters who had covered her divorce began shouting questions. Photographers scrambled to capture images of the woman who had been presumed destroyed, now revealed as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority and confidence that had been stripped from her so many years ago, "allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Vivian Ashford, founder and CEO of my company, mother of Isabella and Sebastian Ashford, and as of today, the majority owner of Ashford Dynamics." The revelation sent immediate shockwaves through the business world. The woman who had been publicly humiliated and cast out as an adulteress had not only survived but had systematically dismantled her ex-husband's empire from the shadows. Social media exploded with reactions. Cable news networks interrupted regular programming. Stock markets fluctuated as investors tried to process the implications of the most spectacular corporate revenge story in modern history. 3 days after the public revelation, Sebastian brought Benjamin to see Vivienne. Not in the penthouse where they had once lived as husband and wife, but in the executive office that had once been his domain, where she now sat behind the desk he had occupied for decades. "Hello, Benjamin," she said quietly, using the formal name she had called him only during their worst fights. Benjamin looked like a shadow of his former self. Gray-haired, thin, his once commanding presence reduced to shameful uncertainty. The psychiatric medications had been cleared from his system, but the weight of his actions and their consequences had left him broken. "Vivian, I don't know how to..." He struggled for words that could possibly address 15 years of devastation, then gave up trying to find them. "You destroyed my life," Vivian continued, her voice steady but not cruel. "You took my child from me, ruined my reputation, and tried to ensure I could never rebuild what you had torn down. You did this not because I betrayed you, but because a woman who was playing a deadly game convinced you that your pride was more important than truth, justice, or the welfare of your family." Benjamin nodded, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his actions finally became clear. "I know. I remember now. I remember how much I loved you, how proud I was of your brilliance, your innovations, your heart. I remember Sebastian asking for you every night for months after I threw you out. I told him you didn't love us anymore." The admission hit Vivienne like a physical blow, but she had prepared for this moment for 15 years. But here's what made Vivienne's victory complete. She didn't destroy Benjamin the way he had destroyed her. Instead, she offered him something he had never shown her, a chance at redemption. "The punishment, Benjamin, is that you have to live with what you've done. You have to live knowing that you threw away a family that loved you for a woman who was planning to murder you. But you also have to live knowing that I'm not going to destroy you the way you destroyed me, because that would make me like you, and I've spent 15 years becoming better than that." Celeste Moreau's trial became the media sensation of the decade, exposing decades of murder and manipulation that had destroyed countless families across multiple states. Federal prosecutors presented evidence linking her to the deaths of at least 6 wealthy men, each killed through carefully administered heart medications that induced fatal cardiac episodes. The woman who had destroyed so many lives through calculated charm and systematic poisoning finally faced justice. Her conviction on charges of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering resulted in 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. For the first time in her criminal career, Celeste's manipulative powers proved useless against overwhelming evidence and witness testimony. But the real transformation happened within the Ashford family itself. The merged company became the most innovative technology corporation in the nation, but more importantly, it became a symbol of what's possible when people choose healing over revenge. Under Vivian's leadership, the company pioneered breakthrough advances in artificial intelligence, medical technology, and clean energy solutions. Sebastian, now 21, and balancing college studies with learning the family business, brought his investigative skills and social conscience to the company's ethics and transparency initiatives. Isabella, at 18 and having deferred college admission to work on educational technology startups, had developed programs that provided free AI tutoring to underprivileged children. She possessed her mother's brilliant mind and strategic thinking, but had also inherited a compassion that would guide the company's charitable efforts for decades to come. Benjamin's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The man who had once been cruel and controlling slowly learned to become a father worthy of his children's respect. It wasn't easy, and trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but redemption proved possible through consistent actions rather than empty words. He attended therapy regularly, worked to understand how he had been manipulated, and gradually developed relationships with both Sebastian and Isabella based on honesty rather than control. While he would never again hold executive power, he contributed his business experience, while acknowledging that better leadership had taken the company to heights he never could have achieved alone. Most importantly, Vivian used her wealth and influence to create lasting change for others facing similar situations. She established legal assistance funds for women fighting difficult divorces, funded shelters and counseling services, and lobbied for changes in laws that made it easier for abusive partners to manipulate the legal system. The penthouse that had once been her prison was converted into a residential facility for women and children escaping domestic violence. The entire building was renovated to provide safe housing, legal assistance, counseling services, and job training programs that helped victims rebuild their lives with dignity and independence. Through this work, Vivian learned 3 crucial life lessons that she shared with everyone she helped. First, power built on cruelty inevitably crumbles, but power built on justice creates lasting change. Benjamin's empire had been built through intimidation and control, making it vulnerable to the very tactics he had used against others. Vivian's success was founded on innovation, fairness, and lifting others up, creating a legacy that would endure. Second, sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we eventually create. Without experiencing devastation firsthand, Vivian might never have developed the determination, strategic thinking, and empathy that enabled her to help thousands of other families. Third, true victory isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so much better that their destruction becomes irrelevant. By choosing redemption over revenge, Vivian had created something more powerful than any act of destruction could have achieved. 5 years after the merger, the family gathered for dinner in Vivian's comfortable home, a place designed for actual family life rather than impressing business associates. Sebastian was completing his graduate studies while preparing to take on greater responsibilities in the company. Isabella had been accepted to MIT but was continuing her work on educational technology. Benjamin attended these gatherings as a welcomed but humbled member of the family he had once nearly destroyed. The conversation that evening turned to the impact their story had made on other families. Letters arrived weekly from women who had found courage to leave abusive situations, men who had recognized manipulation in their own relationships, and children who had been reunited with parents they thought they had lost forever. Vivian's story challenges conventional wisdom about professional revenge. If this analysis added value to your day, consider subscribing. I'm particularly interested. Do you think her approach would work in today's corporate climate? Remember, in a world where the powerful often abuse the vulnerable, sometimes it takes someone who's been destroyed to show us how to build something truly worth building.